Found Duckling by EvaDragon. Chapter 12. Ghosts, Ghosts, and More Ghosts. Summary. The bats encounter their first ghost attack. "Hey, Tim," Danny began as he clicked submit on his essay that was due for his English class. He had gotten a lot of help from Jason. "What's up, Danny?" Tim responded. He was working from home, not wanting to be too far away from Danny. His brother was still showing symptoms of whatever he'd done in Nanda Parbat, and they were still working on those internal trackers. Between the Nanda Parbat incident and the Joker incident, Danny had been summoned twice more. Thankfully, both of them had been in cities with fellow Justice League members who had access to Zeta tubes, and both Superman and Superboy had been introduced to Danny and Phantom to keep an ear out for him in case he ended up somewhere in trouble, which was highly likely. "Could I ask you a question?" he asked while rubbing the back of his neck, a sure sign that he was nervous about what he was about to ask. "Sure," Tim said, closing his laptop and stretching. What were our parents like?" Stumbling over the words a bit. Tim sighed. He knew that this question would come up eventually, and he didn't know if Danny was hoping that he had a better childhood or if he was jealous of having had wonderful and loving parents. "Are you sure you want to know? It may not be the story you want to hear," Tim said with uncertainty. Danny nodded in return. Tim sighed again. "To start, I was generally raised to be the perfect Drake heir. That is, when they were home." Danny frowned at this. "Danny, you have to understand. There's a reason why I never knew you existed. They barely wanted me. I only existed because it was expected of them to have an heir. Someone who could inherit Drake Industries. I looked into their contract, the one they had when Janet was pregnant with you. She was allowed maternity leave. She could have come back to the States at any time." "Oh," Danny said sadly. Tim leaned in to hug his brother. "Janet treated me like I was some kind of exotic pet when she acknowledged my existence, and Jack, when he was sober, rather ignored me. When he was drunk, he was either using me as his personal punching bag or entertaining someone other than Janet behind closed doors. By the time I was 4, I barely even recognized their faces since they were gone more than they were home. I had nannies and caretakers and tutors. By the time I was 6, I was deemed old enough to take care of myself, so the housekeeper would come by every day and cook and clean, but she left at night. That's how I ended up following Bruce and Dick around Gotham with my camera at night. And no one noticed." Tim swallowed thickly. Danny returned the hug Tim had given him earlier. "By the time I was 9, I no longer had anyone coming in to care for me. I was expected to be able to care for myself. Sure, they hired help to care for the house in general, but not for me specifically. When Jason died, they never even noticed that I took over being Robin. I had been Robin for a couple of years before something changed. They came home from one of their trips. They were attacked. Poison. Janet died almost immediately. DOA by the time they got her to the hospital. Jack was in a coma. Bruce tried to take me in then, but I made up an uncle so that I could keep living at Drake Manor. Both Tim and Danny shared a shudder. So being an idiot is genetic then? Danny huffed at his brother. Tim let out an indignant squawk before continuing. Jack eventually recovered, but 6 months later, he remarried. I wasn't fond of my new stepmother, and the feeling was rather mutual. That marriage, to no one's surprise, didn't last long, as Jack died from another attack 3 months later. Since he hadn't had the presence of mind to change his will and hadn't been married long enough, according to New Jersey law, she didn't get anything. Of course she tried, gold digger that she was. I finally relented to Bruce taking me in. It made more sense since I was Robin. I'm sorry, Tim. Danny finally filled in the silence that had settled in the room. I was kind of hoping that at least one of us would have had a semi-normal childhood. But, for all that the Fentons were neglectful as shit, at least they claimed me as theirs. And there were times when they legitimately tried. The rare camping trip with Jack, Maddie would tuck me into bed when I would get sick, that type of thing. It didn't get really bad until they got refocused on their portal. That's when everything else kind of faded into the background. Meh. It's not like it's a competition on who had the worst childhood. Although I do think you're winning on what the fuck lottery. Or was it bingo? Tim laughed, a little on the wet side. But he reckoned it was better than the tears that were threatening to fall. Danny, I say this in the nicest way possible, but what the fuck? Jason exclaimed as he walked into the cave. Danny had appropriated a portion of lab space. Bruce gave it to him after Danny told him that he felt restless if he couldn't tinker. To work on some of the ghost hunting weapons from the blueprints that Tucker had sent him. He knew that it was only a matter of time before some of the ghosts tracked him down, and he wanted to be ahead of the game when that happened. He had already remade the thermos. It would have a larger capacity and was also somehow more humane than the previous version. When Jason walked in, he was working on streamlining the specter deflectors, the wrist rays, and a few of the smaller ghost hunting weapons. Does that go on the what the fuck bingo card Tim was telling me about? Danny laughed as he pulled a blueprint towards him to recheck some of the calculations. Mad Scientist was on mine, Jason snarked. But seriously, Casper, what is all this? Well, I figured it was only a matter of time before my rogues start tracking me down. Before that starts happening, I wanted to get ahead of the game and get some of the more humane ghost hunting weapons built for the bats. I have the boo staff for Tim, some guns for you, a sword for Damien, and some brass knuckle type devices for Bruce. I'm still working on some stuff for the girls and Dick, although Dick's eskrima sticks, when they're electrified, should work well enough. At this, Danny pulled a face. Right now, I'm working on expanding the capacity of the thermos. So what does all this do? Jason looked around in interest. Unlike what the Fentons invent, this stuff is used to weaken ghosts enough to get them into a thermos. Ghosts can tank pretty much anything, and your regular weapons can't hit them. But at the same time, unless you weaken them, the thermos can't contain them. Here's the thing. There's only one way to kill a ghost, and that's to crush their core. But among ghost kind, core crushing is sacrilege, or the evil of all evils. That's why the previous Ghost King was locked in the sarcophagus of forever sleep, even though he was a tyrant. It's why I worked so hard to rescue the other ghosts that were captured by the Fentons and the GIW. Sure, they were my rogues and caused me hell, but they didn't deserve that. Danny didn't notice how tense he had become till Jason and Dick, who had come in during Danny's rant, caged him in between them in a hug. He went stiff before he limp-noodled between them. The Fentons had never cared about the cost of what they did. All they cared about was their own delusions, and no one could tell them any different. Jazz had tried, often. The GIW cared even less about their path of destruction. Wonder Woman's report at the UN summit had proven that. Danny takes a deep breath to steady himself. Anyways, Dick, I should have something close to your eskrima sticks, if not tomorrow, then in a couple of days. I'll need to work with Steph and Cass to get their preferences, and I should have a thermos for everyone by patrol tonight. In any case, there's enough ectoblasters and wrist rays for everyone. Danny flipped his hands to wave off the concern of his older brothers. Dick and Jason stepped away from Danny, getting the hint. The rest of the afternoon passed relatively quickly. True to his word, Danny completed enough thermoses for all of the immediate Batclan to get one. He would still have to make some for the birds of prey and the other members of the Bat family that he hadn't met yet, but those could wait. Dick and Jason, and eventually the rest of the family, wandered in and watched Danny work. There was a morbid curiosity in watching him work. He didn't have access to ectoplasm that powered the weapons, so every once in a while he would transform into his phantom form and nick an arm or prick his finger so that his ectoplasm could be dripped into the weapon he was working on. His cuts would heal almost as soon as he made them, but Danny seemed pleased with himself, so no one made a move to stop, however much they wanted to. Danny handed a thermos to each of his siblings as they got ready for their patrol and explained the operating mechanisms. He handed Tim his boo staff, Jason the guns he had designed, and watched in utter delight as Damien did a few katas with his new katana. Dick picked up a couple of the blasters, and both Steph and Cass were happy to take the batarangs that Danny had modified. For Bruce, Danny held out what looked to be brass knuckles. "I know your stance against guns, so I made these for you," he said as he handed the knuckles to Bruce. Bruce took them carefully and inspected them. "These are really well made," Bruce said after his inspection. Danny's whole face lit up like a firework had gone off. Danny rushed in and hugged Bruce tight. "Thanks, Dad." Bruce froze for all of a whole second before wrapping his arms around Danny in a tight embrace. "Guys, there are reports of 2 green glowing robots floating over the city," Oracle called over the comms. "I need a description. Are they both robots, or is one a robot and the other is an amalgamation of assorted electronics?" Phantom asked. "One is a giant robot that keeps screaming about being the greatest hunter and something about mounting the whelp's pelt on his wall, and the other is an amalgamation of electronics," Oracle reported. "Okay, the robot one is Skulker. By whelp, he means me. He's relatively easy to beat. His head is his weakness. Knock it off and then you can soup him. Just watch for his shoulder missiles. The other is Technus. Red Robin specifically will need to deal with him." "Why me?" Red Robin asked, already en route to the coordinates that Oracle had given him. So Technus's whole deal is master of technology, but his weakness is that he should have an Ethernet port on the back of his neck. If you can plug your wrist computer into it, then you can download a virus into him. It will cause him to lose control over all of the other electronics, and he will start glitching out, making him weak enough to soup into a thermos. "And you seem so sure that this port still exists?" Red Robin asked sarcastically. "I mean, yeah. In the 2 years I've been fighting him, he's not once learned to not have that port. That's how Tucker and I have always been able to defeat him. Maybe it has something to do with him being the ghost of Nikola Tesla. Not sure." There was silence over the comms as everyone processes the bomb that Phantom had just dropped on them. With a plan formulated, the bats separated into teams. Red Hood and Spoiler were off to Skulker's location and grappled off to face him. Red Hood and Spoiler were closer to Skulker's location and grappled off to face him, while Red Robin and Black Bat made their way to Technus. Red Hood signaled to Spoiler to basically deal with Skulker like Luke in Empire Strikes Back when he was dealing with At Walker. Spoiler grinned with manic glee. She fired her grapple at the building opposite of the ghost and then began looping around him. Hood was using his newly acquired blaster guns that were given to him by his newest brother to keep Skulker off balance. It took him a few minutes, but eventually Hood got a good shot on Skulker's power unit, and it malfunctioned. Between the malfunctioning power unit and him getting entangled in Spoiler's grappling line, he went down. Hood and Spoiler pried his head off, and then Spoiler unclipped her shiny new thermos and sucked the ghost in a blinding flash of light. "Holy shit," she breathed out.
"Hell yeah,"
Hood crowed. On the other side of the city, Red Robin and Black Bat battled against several TVs, laptops, 2 washing machines, 1 dishwasher, 2 bulky computer screens, and 2 standing freezers. Red Robin swore he could see several smaller appliances mixed in the amalgamation as well. He signaled to Black Bat to keep the ghost's attention on her. She nodded. They sprang into action like a well-oiled machine. Black Bat did a good job of keeping Technus's attention centered on her, while Red Robin used his grapple to climb onto his shoulders. And just like Phantom claimed, there was indeed an Ethernet port on the back of the ghost's neck. Red Robin wasted no time plunging his wrist computer into the port. As he began downloading a Trojan virus, Technus started bucking. Red Robin felt like he was starring in a radio. "You cannot defeat me. I am the master of technology," Technus screeched. "Maybe the master of failing technology," Red Robin couldn't help but quit. Black Bat snorted, and there were groans over the comms in his ear. Phantom practically cackled like a madman. A few moments later, and all of the appliances under Technus's control crashed to the ground. The ghost's face started glitching uncontrollably. Red Robin flipped off and used that momentum to open his thermos and suck up the ghost. "Good job," signed Black Bat. "Get off me, you fucking Fruit Loop," Phantom yelled. Everyone's comms went silent. "Phantom, report." Batman grunted. "Come now, Daniel. I don't know how you convinced that playboy Brucey Wayne to take you in, nor I do care about your so-called claim to be a brother to one of his sons. We both know that you are Maddie's son through and through," Plasmus said in his smooth, slimy voice. "That bitch isn't my mother, and I will never be your son. I found my family, you asswipe," Phantom snarled. "Phantom, help will arrive to your location in approximately 6 minutes. Can you hold on for that long?" Oracle said in his ear. "Help will be too far away from you, Daniel," Plasmus answered in his stead. "No, not this time. I spent 2 fucking years fighting your schemes. 2 fucking years of being kidnapped, tortured, and chased. It's all your fault. You're the one who brought the GIW into Amity Park. You're the one who funded them. You're the one who put a fucking bounty on my head. You're the one who helped the Fentons pass those goddamned laws. Hell, at this point, I wouldn't even be surprised if you were somehow behind them finding out about me." Each exclamation was punctuated by a burst of green coming from Phantom. Plasmus yelped in surprise and pain. Phantom was moving faster than Plasmus had ever seen. The Crown of Ice, no longer the Crown of Fire, and the Ring of Peace, renamed from the Ring of Rage, appeared on Phantom's form. He began to morph into his eldritch form. His kingly regalia flickered into place. Plasmus's face morphed into one of true fear. "Fright Night to me," Phantom called into the abyss of the night sky. Plasmus's red eyes went wide as saucers, while Phantom conjured a shield around him to contain it. The rest of the bats appeared on the building adjacent to where Phantom was floating mid-air, watching for a signal that Phantom needed them to intervene. A rip in reality appeared on Phantom's left. It swirled the same green of the Lazarus pits, and the waiting bats all tensed. A pitch back, "Holy shit, that was an alicorn," came flying through the portal. It was huge, with bat-like wing with flaming green mane and tail. Sitting on top of the alicorn was a knight, in the same black armor with a flaming purple headdress and cape. The alicorn and the knight came to a stop next to Phantom, where the knight dismounted and knelt in front of Phantom. "My liege, you have summoned me?" the knight asked from his kneeling position. "Rise, Fright Knight. I have brought you to sentence Vladimir Plasmus." Phantom turned to Plasmus, who was pounding on the shield in pure terror. Vladimir Masters, also known as Vladimir Plasmus, deranged Haffa, for crimes against the Crown Prince and Crown Princess of the Infinite Realms, for releasing the mad tyrant Pariah Dark, for harming and ending of human lives on this side of the veil, for the ending of no less than 12 ghosts, animals, and denizens of the realms, I hereby sentence you to 1,000 years, as they pass in the living realm, in the nightmare realm. If you serve your time peacefully and survive, I shall summon you back to review your sentence. Fright Night. At this, the knight took out a large, glowing green sword and swung it at Plasmus, just as Phantom released his shield. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Plasmus seemed to cave inwards, and his whole being vanished into thin air as a scream hovered in the air. The knight then turned to Phantom as if waiting for further orders. The alicorn had drifted over toward the waiting bats. Robin, of course, held his hand out towards the animal with a sugar cube in his hand. "Her name is Nightmare," the knight said as the alicorn took the proffered sugar cube. Phantom snorted. "She's magnificent," Robin breathed out. "Indeed she is, young one," Fright Night laughed. For once, Robin didn't bristle at being called young. He could sense the age rolling off the knight in front of him. "My liege, you have found quite a wonderful fraid, that they would come to help you so quickly. Is this your new haunt? It is quite different from your previous one." He looked about him curiously, noting each of the bats, his gaze lingering on Hood and Red Robin. "Yeah, Freddy, I am making this my haunt. Lady Gotham..." Fright Night looked at his king in surprise, and Phantom nodded. "Is only too happy to share, especially since her knights are part of my fraid. Oh, if you don't mind, could you take Skulker and Technus back with you? I don't have access to a portal here." Fright Night nodded. Phantom floated over to Red Robin and Spoiler, who both handed over their thermoses. Phantom floated back to Fright Night and pushed the button to release the captured ghost. As soon as both ghosts were released, Fright Night caught hold of them. "Lady Gotham is wise indeed, sire. If you have no further need of me?" Phantom nodded, and then just as quickly as he appeared, the Fright Night was gone, taking the two miscreants with him.
"What the fuck?"
Hood breathed out. Cave," Batman grunted. Everyone dispersed. They didn't know what the fuck just happened, but they all knew that they were in for one hell of a story. Once they reconvened back in the cave, Alfred made sure that they were all properly washed and out of uniform. They all gathered in the lounge area while looking at Danny expectantly. He rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. "Let me start with Skulker and Technus. Those are the easy ones, although I'm not sure how they got out of the realms, unless Plasmus released them, which is highly likely. Anyways," Danny flapped his hands to get himself back on track. "Skulker always claimed to be the realm's greatest hunter. His obsession is hunting rare prey. We normally had a truce where I would go into the realms and we would make a game out of it. Sort of like hide and seek, since Haffas are considered something like an endangered species in the realms. I'm guessing that Plasmus paid him off in upgraded weapons or something." "Fuck, Danny. Your rogues are somehow more terrifying than Gotham's," Tim said in a sort of shocked awe. "Technus' whole obsession is technology. Like I said, we, Tucker, Sam, and I think he's the ghost of Nikola Tesla. His whole shtick is anything related to electronics or technology, and you saw what he was capable of. But of all my rogues, he's also one of the easiest to beat because of that weakness that's so easy to exploit." "So who's the one you were fighting with?" Dick asked. "You called him two different names, one of which I've actually heard of. Vlad Masters or Plasmus. He's..." Danny heaved a sigh. The whole thing with Vlad was extremely complicated, although he no longer had to worry about keeping his truce with Vlad. Danny sighed again. "Jack and Maddie went to college with him, and we've already established that they are obsessed with ghosts. They've always been obsessed, even back then. They built their proto-portal with Vlad, and just like the one that killed me, the proto-portal didn't work. I don't know the specifics, but I do know that it either backfired or misfired. Either way, it caused Vlad to end up with what he called a severe case of ectoacne. He ended up dropping out of college and was hospitalized for years. The ectoplasm radiation eventually turned him into something like a Haffa. He has both a human form, which you've probably seen as Vlad Masters, and a ghost form, which you saw tonight. So how does that end up correlating with what happened tonight? Bruce asked, trying to piece together the puzzle. Just after I became a Haffa, there was a college reunion. Of course, Jack and Maddie were invited, and they brought me and Jazz. Vlad and I recognized each other as half-ghosts immediately, but Vlad's primary obsession has always been Maddie, which somehow translated itself to me. He was always trying to kill Jack so Maddie would marry him, and then I could be his son. He didn't like me refusing. It was denying his obsession. Funnily enough, that's how we got Danny. He thought that if he couldn't have me, he would clone me. All of the other clones destabilized, but you know the rest of the story about Danny. And I'm a ray of fucking sunshine, Danny called as she floated down to the cave and into Danny's arms. Danny snorted. She checked her brother over for any injuries and then settled herself on his shoulders like the gremlin she was. What will happen to him now? Asked Jason. So Fright Night is the spirit of fear in Halloween. His sword is called the Soul Shredder. Don't worry, it doesn't actually shred any souls. What it does do is send any it pierces to a nightmare realm for however long Fright Night determines. The person in the realm won't die. They're just forced to live through their worst nightmares for however long they're there. Remind me to never make you mad, Jason snarked, and the rest of the Batclan nodded in vigorous agreement. As with everything that came out of Danny's mouth in regard to his previous life, the Batclan sat in stunned silence. Every time they thought they would be okay with whatever he dumped on them, he proved them wrong, and Bruce hadn't been able to find any records of anyone calling the Justice League for help. It was almost as if Amity Park existed on the map, but was otherwise in a black hole. Danny, did you or anyone else ever try to call the Justice League? Tim finally asked. It bothered him as well that no one had ever tried to reach out, that his brother had gone through so much alone. Tucker tried about 3 months after the portal opened, but all he ever got was static. I think it was something to do with the ectoplasm in the air. Jack and Maddie were lax, and I mean really lax, about keeping the damn thing shut. So ectoplasm leaked into the air more often than not. I know Vlad had a portal in his mansion in Amity Park when he was the mayor, and also one in his castle that in Wisconsin. What will happen to those portals? Tim asked. I mean, technically I think he named me heir to his company, Dalvco, because he's Creeper. Tucker probably has access to or can get access to those records. If he has a portal, we need to shut it down. Leaving it functional is a bad thing. How likely is he to have left it unsecured? Danny paused to think about it. Vlad was nothing if not very practical and particular about his lab and portal safety. His portal will be secure, at least until we can get to it, so not something we have to worry about tonight. I can call Tucker tomorrow, or we can make a day trip out of it. The rest of the Batclan nodded. The adrenaline of the night was catching up to everyone, and they were beginning to feel it. Yawns were seen around the room. Danny's normally present glow was beginning to diminish, and he was no longer floating like he normally did. I do believe it's time for bed. Everything else can wait for the morning, Alfred said sagely as he appeared from the shadows. Everyone agreed as they all began to make their way up to their room. Hey, Danny? Danny started as the two walked side by side once they were alone. What's up, Gremlin? He replied softly, holding on to her. He knew how much the whole affair with Vlad was really affecting her. Is he really gone? She asked in a small voice. Yeah, he is. Friday will make sure he never bothers us again. Notes. Danny. About our parents? Tim. They sucked. Danny. Well, damn. Tim. Yeah, but not like it's a competition on who had a shittier childhood or anything. Jason walks into Danny's portion of the lab in the Batcave. Are you a mad scientist in the making? Danny. Maybe. At least my stuff is organized. Jason. What the fuck? Danny. By the way, I built ghost weapons for everyone. Batclan. Def a mad scientist in the make. Good thing we're here to make sure he doesn't go rogue. Oracle. Ghosts. Batclan. What the fuck? Phantom. Pfft, those are small fry. They're easy. Batclan. The fuck you mean easy? Red Robin facing Technus. He doesn't learn? Phantom. He's special that way. Batclan to Robin. No, you can't have / bring home the scary nightmare ghost creature horse thing. Robin to Batclan. Damn it, I even fed it a treat. Damien. Danny, I've said this before, but sometimes you scare the fuck out of us. Danny. Thank you, I try my best. Danny. I can finally rest in peace. Danny. Thank fuck, I should have done that a long time ago.